Today we're unboxing an iPhone 7 Plus that I purchased on eBay as being in open box condition. However, there were several things about this purchase that are kind of up in the air, so I was not able to confirm from the listing photos that this is running its original software version, iOS 10. I did ask the seller if they could provide me with the serial number or a photo of the back of the box, but they did not get back to me with that. And Apple did sell this model at a discounted price several years after it launched, so there is a potential that this could be running a later version like iOS 11 or 12. But anyway, let's go ahead and get this opened up to see what we actually have. Okay, so here is our iPhone 7 Plus. This one is in the silver color option. Looks like we've got a little bit of dirt going on here as well as a few scratches. Turning the box over here, we can see that this is the base model 32GB storage option, and down here we are able to see that this has a 2016 copyright date. That is a very good sign that this may be running iOS 10, as Apple will usually update the copyright year down here for the later produced models. But anyway, let's go ahead and remove the lid from this box now. And okay, I forgot, but this was the first iPhone model where you were not met with the actual device right when you open the lid. Instead, here you have the literature packet on top. But now that we can see the actual iPhone itself here, we can see that this is in its original plastic film. Definitely hammered in fingerprints though, so this has been handled before. And lifting this up, we can take a look at the back. Okay, well, it looks like this back film may have been partially removed before, just due to this large amount of bubbles. But setting this to the side, let's take a look at what accessories we have. So it appears that the power adapter is missing, but we do have the EarPods headphones here. Also, we will take a quick look at the literature packet here. So this should include the Quick Start Guide, which we have here on top, as well as the regulatory info and 2 Apple stickers. So the biggest reason that I was okay with all of the unknown things about this device is just because of the price. I only paid $50 for this. But before I get this connected to power, I want to check the serial number from this device in an online check service. That will tell me the production date of this device, and I'll be able to know what version it should have shipped with. Okay, well, some bad news here. I was able to check the serial number, and it turns out this device was produced in July of 2019. So unless the box for this device was somehow swapped, it means that this should be running iOS 12. And that's definitely a bit of a bummer, but let's go ahead and get the device connected to power anyway. And we do see the battery charging icon here. I do think that this looks more like the iOS 11 or 12 battery icon. Just due to the thicker outline here, I'm pretty sure that change was made in iOS 11. So yeah, I'll set this to the side now and allow it some time to charge up, then I'll resume the video when it's ready. Okay, well, a very bad sign here. The device has started up, but it does appear that there is a passcode. Okay, so update on the 7 Plus. I was finally able to get into contact with the eBay seller, and they were able to tell me the correct password. So I was able to go in and remove the password. I'm honestly not too sure why the seller had a passcode set here on a clean install. But at least they were able to provide me with the correct password, and I did not have to erase the device. Also, I did check in settings and there was not any sort of iCloud account attached. But yes, now that we are finally in, it definitely does appear that this 7 Plus is in open box condition, just a later model to be produced. A huge giveaway that this was just simply set up and not erased is the presence of all of these Apple pre-installed applications. These are usually present on the initial software install, but if you would erase the device through settings, they would not be there. But anyway, let's now go into settings so we can see exactly which version of iOS 12 we have. And okay, it looks like we are running 12.3.1 here, so that's in line with the mid-2019 production date. We also get confirmation of the 32GB capacity, although a lot of that is taken up by those pre-installed Apple applications. Also, while we're here in settings, let's take a look at the battery health. So the battery health feature started with later versions of iOS 11. Those versions, however, were still noted as being in beta, so iOS 12 here was the first just standard release of battery health. And yes, we are seeing 100% as the maximum capacity here, so that is a great sign. Also, I did connect this iPhone to the desktop coconut battery application and found out that there is only one cycle on the battery. But yeah, anyway, I do think this is a pretty cool iPhone to have in my collection, even though it isn't running its original software version. As I said at the beginning of the video, I knew I was taking a gamble with this device as it was not guaranteed to be running iOS 10. Luckily though, I do have an iOS 10 7 Plus in my collection, so we can kind of compare these two in this video. But starting off with just the iPhone 7 Plus in general, this model was released in September of 2016. It was released alongside the standard-sized iPhone 7, and these were the successors to the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus. However, there was something a little bit different about these iPhones. So Apple had been in a rhythm really since 2009 of releasing an iPhone with a new design one year and then an S model the following year that was just an incremental upgrade. So if they had continued with that pattern, the iPhone 7 models here should have brought an all-new design. However, that was not the case. While they did have a slightly updated appearance compared to the 6 and 6s models, as you can see here, the basic design was really the same as what we had had since 2014. That wasn't a huge deal. It wasn't like there was a glaring issue with this design, especially since Apple mostly fixed bin gate with the 6s. However, it just kind of showed a slow in the design changes year over year. Although it was definitely something that Apple addressed the following year when the iPhone 10 came out. This model launched alongside the 8 Plus, which did have a very traditional design similar to the 7 Plus. But again, getting back to the 7 Plus, the model was offered in 5 colors at launch. So I have 4 of the 5 initial colors here in my collection. First off, you could go with the classic silver. You could also go for the rose gold color that had launched back on the 6S. These were matched to a white display bezel, and there was also a standard gold color option available. But aside from those finishes, we had 2 choices for black models. There was the standard black option, which replaced the space gray color. This was a true matte black finish, which was a big departure from the much lighter space gray. But the real star of the show for the iPhone 7 colors was the jet black model. I have one of those here, and as you can see, this one had a stunning mirror-like finish. It was still made from aluminum like the other models, although the depth of this finish looks much more like glass. This finish was really prone to micro scratches, but it just looked so stunning when it was in great condition. Apple went on to add a 6th color option in spring of 2017, and that was when we received the Product Red model. So that was the first Product Red iPhone to ever be offered, and it was pretty unique because every future model was matched to a black display bezel. The red housing with white display bezels and silver accents reminds me more of Product Red iPod models. One of the biggest things that the iPhone 7 was infamous for was removing the 3.5mm headphone jack. That had been present on every previous iPhone, so removing it was definitely a shock at the time. Apple was launching their first wireless earbuds with the AirPods right around the same time as this launch. So I think we all know that was definitely their ulterior motive with removing the headphone jack on this model. At least they did include a Lightning to 3.5mm headphone jack adapter in the box, as well as earpods with a Lightning connector. But yeah, it just kind of seemed like something that was too soon, as wireless audio was still pretty expensive and uncommon at the time. Something else more positive though that the iPhone 7 was remembered for was its camera improvements. So especially here on the 7 Plus, this was the first model to have 2 camera sensors. These were both 12 megapixels with the 2x telephoto lens joining the party to enable a new portrait mode feature. So as this little splash screen here is telling you, this would basically just blur the background and create a quality similar to a DSLR camera. So here is a quick photo I snapped using portrait mode here on the 7 Plus. As you can see, this really doesn't work too well. It was definitely an early attempt. So details here around the edge are pretty unnatural. It really just shaved off part of the 7 Plus in this picture. But this isn't really the intended function of portrait mode. It was meant to be used on actual photos of people. So for that, it did tend to work better, and it was just a really cool feature to have in your pocket. And one may argue, aside from optical image stabilization on the 6 Plus, that this was one of the earliest steps Apple took toward a pro camera system in their iPhones. There was also now optical image stabilization on the standard iPhone 7. It was no longer a Plus exclusive feature. And the front-facing camera got a bump to 7 megapixels up from 5. And there was now a cool quad element flash on the 7 models instead of the dual tone that we had on the 6S. Something else pretty cool about the iPhone 7 models is that these were the first to be officially IP67 water and dust resistance rated. But another big change for the iPhone 7 models was the home button. It was no longer a physically clicking unit. Instead, it was a solid state button that would replicate a click with haptic feedback. That was of course using the Taptic engine that had launched back in the iPhone 6S. So the feedback here was just something to get used to, quite different from a regular click. You could change the amount of feedback though in settings. So you had 3 different choices here, basically just different intensity levels. There were now stereo speakers on the iPhone for the first time, with the top earpiece speaker acting as a secondary speaker to the bottom facing one. That made a huge improvement to audio quality here. Not only was the sound louder, it was more balanced as well. And the iPhone 7 models were more powerful inside, now being powered by a quad-core A10 Fusion chip. It was clocked at around 2.3 GHz, and it introduced the whole efficiency performance core setup that Apple still uses today. Although this processor could not use all 4 cores at once like the future 6-core chips could. The standard iPhone 7 model stuck to the same 2 GB of RAM that the 6S had, but the 7 Plus got a bump to 3 GB. The display on the iPhone 7 models were now slightly brighter, and they still carried on the 3D Touch technology that launched back on the iPhone 6S 1 year back. The pressure sensitivity of 3D Touch was something really cool. It was sadly removed with the iPhone XR in 2018. It was then removed from the iPhone 11 lineup altogether. So there were just a handful of iPhone models that featured this, ranging from the 6S to the XS and XS Max. It really made doing a lot of things easier, especially here on the keyboard where you could press with extra force anywhere to enable a trackpad mode. The base storage for the iPhone 7 models was now 32 GB instead of the paltry 16 GB that was really becoming unusable on previous models. And there was now a new top-end configuration with 256 GB, which is coincidentally the base amount that we have in iPhones today. The iPhone 7 models were sold all the way through late 2019 when the iPhone 11 came out. And these models receive software support through iOS 15, which is still receiving very recent security updates even here in 2025. So if you have an iPhone 7 model that has been updated, it is still relatively usable. One area where the iPhone 7 kind of fell short was battery life. It just wasn't super great on these. There was also a logic board issue with the audio chips that would result in no sound coming from your device. And now turning our attention to more of the software on this device, as I said, it did launch with iOS 10. That model was known for ditching the classic slide to unlock feature, being replaced with press home to open. And that was just because sliding on the lock screen now brought up this widget view. Also, iOS 10 was the first to feature raise to wake. There was also a pretty unique control center here for iOS 10, so it had this like card style view. The first page here had your more basic controls, the second page had your audio controls, and the third page would have your smart home accessories if you were connected. This was changed starting in iOS 11 for a more simple one-page view. That was mostly necessitated for the iPhone 10 design, but I do agree that the iOS 11 and up control center just works better than this one. Both of these versions though have something that was exclusive to the older Plus model iPhones, and that was this landscape orientation for the home screen. For whatever reason, this was just something that was not available with iPhones any newer than the 8 Plus. But speaking more here on iOS 12 that this device is running, this was the first release for the iPhone XR as well as the XS and XS Max. And as a release, iOS 12 was not huge in the way of features. Instead, it was more of a refinement over iOS 11, which was known for being a very buggy and unstable release. So now let's take a look at the default wallpaper selection here for iOS 12. First off, we have this dynamic category. These were carried over from iOS 7. The stills category here was mostly carryovers from iOS 11. So classic options here like the globe image from the original iPhone, as well as these gradient flower choices and these rainbow images that were a throwback to the old Apple logo. This option here was the only new choice for iOS 12, which was the default. We also had the default wave image from iOS 11. But overall, in my opinion, these wallpapers are pretty underwhelming. We do also have the live category here using 3D touch. Although there are only 3 choices and these were not new, they were carried over from the iPhone 6s. Strangely though, here with iOS 12 on the 7 Plus, we do not get the beta fish images. These are present with iOS 10 on the 7 Plus. I feel like Apple always makes weird decisions with removing wallpapers on their devices running later versions. I know it's not really realistic to keep all of the wallpapers they have ever made, but I don't know, it's just always sad when we see ones removed. So that pretty much concludes my look at this open box iPhone 7 Plus running iOS 12.3.1. This one was definitely a roller coaster of emotions with me not being sure what version it was running. Then of course finding out it was running iOS 12 and it was passcode locked. And finally having to message the seller for the password and waiting for them to respond. But yeah, I think this ended up being a pretty good purchase and it's definitely cool to have in my collection. So be sure to leave me a comment below with your thoughts on this device. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one.